So this will be my third and hopefully the last unplanned presentation on Tsongkhapa's life, which began on his anniversary on the 25th of the 10th Tibetan lunar calendar. So I wanted to touch partly on his personality, which comes up in his biographies. As I told you, he might be one of the few who has so many biographies and in his honor. First of which is his own autobiography, which seems like, from the content, seems like he penned it down much later in his life, because it covers a lot of his works on tantras as well as sutras also, but tantras as well, particularly touching on how he then spent most of his later lives in very strict meditation, whatnot, although that's what he had been intermittently doing between his studies as well, early on too, beginning with the urge from Manjushri around the time when he was, I think in his, if I remember clearly, 39, 40-ish period. So that's when he committed himself to very strict, almost 3 years, 4 years of retreat. But then sporadically, you can see him almost very often in retreat high up on the mountains, and very often requests for him to come down and teach and visit the Chinese emperor, etc., etc. Maybe requests from the political system, etc. They were all so politely turned down by saying, I've committed myself to be in high up on the mountain. It is difficult for me to come down to break that commitment. So that's what comes to my mind when I speak of his autobiography. But very interestingly, in his autobiography, he doesn't dwell on anything but on his practice, beginning with intensive study, followed by reflection, contemplation, to the point of really making sense of it in terms of its instruction to develop oneself, particularly in terms of where things fit, what comes first, what comes next, what is meant to augment something, what is meant to annotate on something, etc., etc. So that way he could see the entire corpus of the studies that he had done and really fit in so well in some kind of a very coherent way, and that particularly as a message to progress in one's spiritual journey. So we call that Dhamma. Everything is studied now appears as Dhamma. In English it is translated as instruction, but I think it is stronger than that, in that they are all pointing to where things fit, how to practice, what comes first, what comes next, all of those. That includes his studies into the Tantras as well. But so he dwells on his study part, and then the reflection part, and then the tantric studies as well as then practice. And in a way, he's kind of showing us, guiding us how to pursue the study, and also making special, reasonings, justifications against some very prevalent misunderstandings regarding certain portions of the teachings of the Buddha. So anyway, that aside, most of his biographies deal with his common life as well as his uncommon life. Uncommon in the sense of something that is not apparent to ordinary people. We usually call it sangwa, and in English it is translated as secret. But of course it makes sense, secret in the sense that it is not apparent to the general people. But I kind of think those are mostly mystical experiences. And it would be better off to call them as mystical experiences rather than secret. Not that something he was doing something secretly away from others, but mystical experiences. And in a way, very interestingly, last time I shared about this biography, among all others, which was a series of 21 interviews by one of his attendants, who himself was a great scholar, deserving of being called Pandit. Yet at the same time, he repeatedly requested, and eventually Tsongkhapa relented to his request. And that was close to his life, and he was not so feeling well as well. He had a stint of perfect health recovery, and then suddenly he showed some signs of his passing away. And that was already hinted at from various other events that preceded it. Soon, in that small interval between his full recovery and then apparently, outwardly kind of relapsing, there were many incidents, evidences showing that he knew his imminent passing away, which from a devoted student point of view, we would say, yes, now there was time for him to leave, having done his activities meant specifically for those who were to ripen under his guidance. So anyway, but the remaining of the biographies deal with his common, uncommon. But then interestingly, this particular one, which is an interview of him, deals mostly with the mystical experiences, and there he shares them at the behest of his disciple, and he shares them, and in between he says he did this some certain practices that he did at the behest of at the command instruction of Manjushri, and not at all for any worldly gains or worldly concerns. Yet, so he would also feel concerned about how people might take what might have appeared to them, what might have come across to them. Yet at the same time, he was revealing most of his mystical experiences, and that makes perfect sense, because if someone else were to write about his mystical experiences, then that could be a concern of doubt. And how come you know his secret, his mystical experiences? But mystical experiences are very personal, and it would only have to come from this person himself or herself to be authentic, and that's where it all originates. And that's, for long I was wondering about it, when in our Tibetan system, Tibetan monastic culture, every year after Losar, maybe beginning from the 7th until the 15th or 16th, we celebrate Buddha's miraculous activities against his opponents in the form of Mölam Chemo, the great prayer festival. And during those, which was instituted by Tsongkhapa, and during those prayer sessions in the afternoon session is called Kamso, dry session. Dry because there will be no food offered, and understandably not even tea. But in India, they have introduced offering tea. It's not quite dry, but not as wet with so much oil, so many more uh, sumptuous food or offerings, or even including kuyun, I think, the monetary offerings also. So during that time, every day we would recite this Sangwen Namtar, this mystical experience of him written by one of his disciples. And I would wonder how come uh, this could be coming from somebody else. And now I see very clearly where it is coming from. And interestingly, Kitupche also touches on it. And also one of Tsongkhapa's uh, oldest disciple, Tongden Jambe, who was himself 1 year elder than Tsongkhapa, yet at the same time very advanced in his practice. He, along with another disciple of Tsongkhapa, Ketum Nosan Gyatso, they are said to have attained Buddhahood, but with a low profile. And likewise, there are many in across the Tibetan Buddhist traditions where we describe beings, practitioners, irrespective whether of wide popularity or not, having attained enlightenment. So that said, I want to share something about his personality that comes in those accounts. He was very polite, kind, and very attentive to the students. And one thing very special, he would always repeat back the questions asked by the students. By the way, thinking of questions, teachings of time that passed with none of these technologies, I always wonder how would that look like? How that might look like? How does teachings get across? And then here, the students asking questions, how would they ask? And to those who get to sit close to him, only those got to ask questions, or what about the others? If they did, how would that be passed on to? Maybe passed on to one person to another person to another person, or like that. So in any case, he would then make sure that he repeats the question for the benefit of others to hear it, and also to make sure that he understood the question correctly. That makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense, and that makes perfect sense of you really being mindful in making use, perfect, beneficial, good use of the time. And then I would like to touch on, I've already used the time. Then I want to touch slightly on how smart he was. In what he achieved and what he did, in terms of really being called revolutionary or reformer, in what ways he really kind of put the Buddha Dharma together in such a coherent and in such a very systematic, a comprehensible way. We have a saying in Tibetan, Useng Utse Singajing Nul. Uma is Madhyamika, Sema is Pramana, or epistemology, you may call it, or logic together. It's not that clear cut. We assign these names from English, but they should not sound as clear cut as this being epistemology, not logic, none like that. It has parts on it. So anyway, Uma and Sema, Madhyamika and Pramana, they are likened to two lions with their necks locked, so that they have each other's back. So likewise, Tsongkhapa used this in his presentation with Uma. He was a person who was one of the greatest minds, very clear mind, and very smart, very far-reaching, and very profound. Yet at the same time was very much after I kind of pushing the, as I was saying, pushing the boundaries of in human thinking, language, to the extent possible in conveying all of the spiritual experiences that is possible, to the extent the language and conceptual thoughts, given their limitations, can take us to, and wouldn't just merely leave things to just an easy, what do you call, excuse, saying, "Oh, this is too profound, cannot be even expressed." There are things that cannot be expressed when it comes to the actual experiences, but nothing that cannot be expressed, explained to a certain extent. And that's what he tried. And by that, and in that respect, when it comes to Uma, he kind of really presented it by using the pramana tools, if you will, brought together, put together systematically by Acharya Dignaga and Acharya Dharmakirti, yet kind of using them in such a way like bees get just what they want from the flower without disturbing. Likewise, he kind of used their language but not borrowed their underpinning assumptions of how things exist. So he kind of really filtered it in such a way that he just got that tool and then he employed it in presenting his Madhyamika philosophy in such a coherent and non-contradictory way, without having to really rely on without having to unnecessarily rely on philosophical paradoxes, like it does exist, it does not exist, saying it in one breath. None of that, which was the case in the way the Madhyamika was presented at the time he was studying. And then in very interestingly, how smart he was and how very particular he was in his presentation was very apparent if you look only at just one book, his Lambrinch Chemo. You will see when it comes to the practice and the inspirations to practice and the aphoristic sayings that kind of point to how things should be, etc., etc., he would mostly quote the Kadamba masters, including Atisha. Even in Atisha, given his undisputed alliance with Nagarjuna's Madhyamika, very rarely you will find him quoting Atisha in that respect. He would go straight to Nagarjuna, Chandrakirti, Baba Viveka sometimes, and Buddhapalita and others. When it comes to meditation, so when it comes to meditation, he would mostly use the works of Yogacara masters, despite their very different take on philosophy. But he would mostly use the Yogacara masters, and with the exception of Kamanashila, but mostly Asangas and Avasubandhu's texts in establishing how meditation should be carried out. But when it comes to the wisdom part of the Madhyamika, as I said earlier, it was Nagarjuna, Chandrakirti, Buddhapalita. Almost none of the Tibetan masters. But then when it comes to substance, in the form of the bodhicitta, etc., then he would again resort to the masters belonging to the expansive lineage, particularly the works of Maitreya, Asanga, and yes, of course, Shantideva. And so he integrates the two instructions together. So those are specialities in him by which he was able to really achieve this marvelous way of presenting Buddhism in a very coherent, rational way, and uh, kind of really utilizing human conceptual thought, conceptuality, and language to the extent, to their furthest extent, in coming to use in presenting them. So, as I was saying, there are so many aspects of his life, and that's very much represented in the works of Kitubje, one of his two principal masters. In that, he writes the first official biography, the long first official biography. That might be the first one to come out after Tsongkhapa's passing away. And most of the and that laid out the chronology of the happenings, and that kind of was the main, source. But then he also wrote a particular chantable composition which recounts particularly Tsongkhapa's past lives, including his meeting the Shakyamuni Buddha as a small child, being cared under the care of some other sage, and his making bodhicitta a generation, and then etc., to how he would eventually attain full awakening. So he accounts that in one particular composition. And then there is another composition which mainly focuses on his inner qualities, and then another on his mysterious experiences, and then another which kind of really covers the whole thing. So likewise, others also kind of take one aspect of his the deeds and then expands on it. That's how the number of biographies come to this many, 40 plus, including the latest one, Geshe Thupten Jinpa's one. So I think with this, I will stop here. Already very past the allotted time. So thank you, and this will be my last presentation on Tsongkhapa's life story.